total chaos in Venezuela. Hunger, lack of medicine, and latest, nearly the whole country had a blackout.
Okay, and see, she never tells you any of the reasons for any of those things, and she makes you think it's because of socialism or Maduro or Chavista. It's because the United States and Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is overproducing oil and knocked oil's prices down from $100 to down to like $28 a barrel now. And then the United States puts sanctions on. Just like with Iraq, those sanctions aren't there to bring democracy to the people. They're there to bring a country to its knees so we can then steal their natural resources. So that's what we're creating these economic problems in Venezuela, the United States, by our sanctions. The rapporteur on Venezuela, the UN rapporteur, said that our sanctions rise to the level of a war crime.
So, a lot of people say that the United States has caused this disaster in Venezuela. So, I actually wanted to stand here and actually read what really happened. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you can go and look up the history of what actually happened in Venezuela, and it's not that difficult. You know what I mean? I'll leave the link in the description for you so you know exactly where to find it. I put it in book form. I just copied and pasted it into a Word document and then put it in book form so that y'all can see what I'm doing. So let's get into this because it's about 1,700 motherfucking words, right? All right, so for more than a decade, the United States has employed sanctions as a policy tool in response to activities of the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan individuals. These have included sanctions related to terrorism, drug trafficking, trafficking in persons, anti-democratic actions, human rights violations, and corruption. Overall, the Treasury Department has imposed financial sanctions on 111 individuals, and the State Department has revoked the visa of more than 250 individuals. On January 28, 2019, the Trump administration announced sanctions on Venezuela's state oil companies, Petróleos de Venezuela S.A. or PDVSA. Several days before the imposition of the PDVSA sanctions, the United States recognized Juan Guaido, the head of Venezuela's National Assembly, as the country's interim president, and ceased to recognize Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. Now, let's stop here for a second and real quick, let's have a conversation about what actually happened with that, right? So here's the deal. Venezuela has a representative republic the same as we do. It's representative democracy, republic, whichever way you want to say it. You know, I know people say it's interchangeable. It's really not. But that means that they have a House of Representatives, right? That means that they have a Senate. And their Senate, you know what I mean, stood here and said, hey, look, we're tired of you running the fucking country into the ground, Maduro. You know what I mean? And we don't think that what you're doing is fucking working. We want a different president. You know what I mean? And so they put somebody up from them to run against Maduro. And like when fucking Maduro basically lost the election, and you know what I mean, like, because it was like, yo, the government officials were like stealing boxes and all types of shit. There was some crazy stuff going on. But we stood here and recognized Juan Guaido, the guy from the Senate, instead of Maduro, who took over for Cesar Chavez, right? For Hugo Chavez. Anyway, sorry, man, I'm a boxing guy. So Juan Guaido, head of Venezuela's National Assembly, is the country's interim president and ceased to recognize Nicolas Maduro as the president of Venezuela. Terrorism-related sanctions since 2006. U.S. officials have expressed concerns about Venezuela's lack of cooperation on anti-terrorism efforts. Since then, the Secretary of State has made an annual determination that Venezuela is not cooperating fully with the United States' anti-terrorism efforts. Pursuant to Section 48 of the Arms Export Control Act, the most recent determination was made in May 2018. As a result, the United States has prohibited all U.S. commercial arms sales and retransfers to Venezuela since 2006. Now, that's because they were working with Hezbollah, right? And the reason they were working with Hezbollah is because, let's be real here, what it is this is more these war games between us and Russia, right? You know what I mean? It goes back and forth, us, Russia, and China. And they use satellite states to provide arms, right? So we did the same thing with the war in Afghanistan with the Russians. Like, we used like 4 different countries. Like Israel produced the weapons, right? But they were bought through Saudi Arabia and given to the Afghanis. But they actually the weapons were actually Swedish weapons, but they were made in Israel. Like it was a crazy mix. And this is how things work so that you don't get recognized by your enemies for doing what you do. All right. So, it's again, it's just war games, right? So now, all right. On the most recent, in the Treasury Department imposed sanctions, asset freezes, and prohibitions on transactions on 2 individuals and 2 travel agencies in Venezuela for providing financial support to radical Lebanon-based Islamic Shiite group Hezbollah. The action was taken pursuant to Executive Order 13224 aimed at impeding terrorist funding, drug trafficking related sanctions. U.S. concerns about the lack of Venezuelan cooperation on the counter-narcotics efforts date back in 2005. Since then, the president has made an annual determination pursuant to procedures set forth in the Foreign Relations Authorization Act. Now, the president doesn't really make any actual fucking determinations. Like, it's made in the executive branch, and that's what they mean when they say the president made an annual determination. The president ain't got time to be paying attention to what the fuck everybody's fucking doing in the whole world. You know what I mean? You got enough problems dealing with this bullshit here. All right, so Venezuela has failed demonstrably to adhere to obligations under the international narcotics agreements. President Trump made the most recent determination in fiscal year 2017 in September 2018, but also waived foreign aid restrictions for programs to support democracy promotion. The Treasury Department has imposed economic sanctions on at least 22 individuals with connections to Venezuela and 27 companies by designating them as specially designated narcotics traffickers pursuant to Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. Oh, Jesus Christ. Right. Designated individuals include several current or former Venezuelan officials. In 2008, General Hugo Carvalho, former military intelligence head, General Henry Rangel Silva, and Ramon Chacon, former interior minister and former governor Guajardo. In 2011, Freddy Arellano Rosales and Emilar Jesus Figueroa Salazar, United Socialist Party of Venezuela, or PSUV politicians, Major General Clive Antonio. These are basically all individuals that were fucking, stand here and had sanctions put against them, right? Others designated include drug trafficker Walid Makhled, 3 dual Lebanese Venezuelan citizens allegedly involved in drug money laundering network, and several Colombian drug traffickers with activities in Venezuela. Trafficking in persons sanctions since 2014. Venezuela has been in the State Department's Tier 3 list in its annual Trafficking in Persons report. Tier 3 countries are those whose governments who do not fully comply with the minimum standards of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and are not making significant efforts to do so. They are subject to a variety of U.S. aid restrictions, which may be waived by President or for national interest reasons. Targeting stations related to anti-democratic actions, human rights violation, and corruption in response to increasing repression in Venezuela, Congress enacted the Venezuelan Defense of Human Rights and Civil Society Act of 2014 under Obama. In December 2014, among its provisions, the law requires the president to impose sanctions against those whom president determines are responsible for significant acts of violence or serious human rights abuses associated with February 2014 protests, or more broadly against anyone who was directed or ordered to arrest or prosecution of a person primarily because of person's legitimate exercise of freedom of expression or assembly. In 2016, Congress extended the 2014 Act through 2019, and that was again under Obama in December 2016, I think December 31st, right as he was leaving office. In March 2015, President issued Executive Order 139692 to implement PL 113-278, and the Treasury Department issues regulations in July 2015. The executive order targets for asset blocking and visa restriction those involved in actions or political undermining democratic processes or institutions, those involved in acts of violence or conduct constituting a serious human rights abuse. Those taking actions that prohibit, limit, or penalize the exercise of freedom or expression, peaceful assembly, public corruption by senior Venezuelan officials, or any person determined to be current or former leader of any entity engaged in any activity described above, or one of the former officials of the government of Venezuela to date. The Treasury Department has imposed financial sanctions on 80 Venezuelans pursuant to Executive Order 13692. Under the Obama administration, the Treasury Department froze the assets of 7 Venezuelans, 6 members of Venezuela's security forces, and a prosecutor involved in repressing anti-government protesters. Under the Trump administration, as the political situation in Venezuela has deteriorated, the Treasury Department sanctioned an additional 73 Venezuelan government and military officials from May 2017 to March 2019. These officials include President Nicolas Maduro, his wife Cecilia Flores, Executive Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, PSFU First Vice President Diosdado Cabello, 8 Supreme Court members, the leaders of Venezuela's Army, National Guard, and National Police, and 4 state governors. On November 1st, 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13850, setting forth a framework to block assets of and prohibit the pertinent transactions with any person determined by the Secretary of the Treasury in consultation with the Secretary of State to operate in the gold sector or any other sector of the economy as determined by the future of the Secretary of the Treasury to be responsible or complicit in transactions involving deceptive practices or corruption. Now, this here I have a bit of an issue with. Actually, I have an issue with all this, to be honest with you. I don't fucking like the idea of using sanctions. I don't think sanctions are fine against drug traffickers, and human traffickers, and, against terrorism. That's cool. Defund it. That's not an issue. But my problem comes in with when you start telling other countries how to run their fucking countries. That's not something that I'm fucking all right with. I'll be honest with you. But this here actually came after Venezuela tried to reappropriate its fucking gold out of the gold reserves in, I think it was Frankfurt, Germany. I'm not absolutely sure. It might have been London, but I know it was over in Europe, somewhere over there, one of y'all European countries, especially, Britain's Europe, basically. It's all not America land, right? Or to be responsible and complicit in transactions involving deceptive practices and corruption of the Venezuelan government. On January 8, 2019, pursuant to Executive Order 13850, the Trump administration sanctioned 7 individuals and 23 companies for involvement in the corruption scheme involving Venezuela's currency exchange practices that generated more than $2.4 billion in corrupt proceeds. Again, I don't really care about this. Sanctions on PDVSA on January 28, 2019, pursuant to Executive Order 13850, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control designated PDVSA as operating in the oil sector of Venezuelan economy, and Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin determined that the company was subject to U.S. sanctions. As a result, all property and interest in property of PDVSA subject to U.S. jurisdictions are blocked, and U.S. persons generally are prohibited from engaging with transactions with the company. At the time, OFAC issued general licenses to allow certain transactions and activities related to PDVSA and its subsidiaries, some within specified time frames or wind-down periods. Transactions with 2 U.S.-based PDVSA subsidiaries, PDV Holding and Citgo Holding. If y'all didn't know, Citgo is owned by the Venezuelan government. I had no idea about that. And other U.S. companies are authorized to import petroleum from PDVSA through April 29, 2019. And actually, it's been extended to July of 2019. Payments for these transactions benefiting from PDVSA must be paid into a blocked account in the United States. Several U.S. companies with operations in Venezuela involving PDVSA are authorized to continue their operations through July 27, 2019. Additional financial sanctions, in addition to targeted sanctions against individual companies, President Trump has imposed broader financial sanctions on Venezuela through 3 additional EOs because of the government's serious human rights violations, anti-democratic actions, and responsibilities for the deepening humanitarian crisis. In August 2017, President Trump issued Executive Order 13808, which prohibits access to the U.S. financial markets by the Venezuelan government, including PDVSA, with certain exceptions to minimize the impact on Venezuelan people and the U.S. economic interests. These sanctions restrict the Venezuelan government's access to U.S. debt and equity markets. Among the exceptions are transactions for new debt by Citco, owned by PDVSA, certain transactions by U.S. Owners of certain Venezuelan PDVSA bonds on secondary markets. That was a congressman. Let's be real here. Financing for agricultural, medical exports, and short-term financing to facilitate trade. In March 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13827, which prohibits transactions involving the Venezuelan government's issuance and use of digital currency, digital coin, or digital token. The Maduro government launched a cryptocurrency known as the Petro in 2018 in an effort to circumvent sanctions. In May 2018, President Trump issued Executive Order 13835, which prohibits transactions related to the purchase of Venezuelan debt, including accounts receivable, and that any debt owed to Venezuela pledges collateral. U.S. officials assert that the action was intended to deny corrupt Venezuelan officials the ability to improperly value and sell off public assets in return for kickbacks. Policy considerations to Venezuelan oil exports to the United States already had been declining. Sanctions on that trade are requiring U.S. refineries that process Venezuelan crude oil to find alternate sources. A complicated factor in the sanctions on PDVSA is that the company owns Citco, which operates 3 crude oil refineries, 3 pipelines, and numerous petroleum product terminals in the United States. However, Venezuela's interim government is in the process of asserting control over Citco. Some analysts are concerned that stronger sanctions on PDVSA will further exacerbate Venezuela's difficult humanitarian crisis, already marked by shortages of food, medicines, and mass migration. By limiting the country's key source of revenue, this is a particular concern in the event that Maduro remains in power over an extended period of time. Some observers also maintain that economic sanctions ultimately may lead to be accompanied by efforts to foster a negotiated solution leading to free and fair elections. For guidance on Venezuelan sanctions, see the U.S. Department of Treasury, Venezuela-related sanctions at www.treasury.gov/resource center/sanctions/program/pages/venezuela.aspx, and the U.S. Department of State Venezuela-related sanctions at state.gov/e-ebay/tfs/sbi/Venezuela. For more CRS, see CRS in Focus, Venezuela Political Crisis, U.S. Policy CRS Report R44841, Venezuela Background and U.S. Relations, CRS in Focus, the Venezuela Regional Migration Crisis, and CRS Insight IN 11037. Now, let's have a conversation, all right? Because this is really where it's at. See, everybody's wrong. And this happens a lot, all right? You know, when you have left versus right and the socialists versus the capitalists and all this bullshit, everyone's wrong, okay? Because here's really what happened, all right? Hugo Chavez got to be the luckiest motherfucker on the planet. He ended up inheriting a country, right? He won an election in 1999 and nationalized an oil company, all right? Well, he finished nationalizing it, you know, because I think it was already like 75% nationalized. And when he did this, oil prices went from $25 a barrel to $150. So it allowed for massive amounts of things to be done. For instance, allowed for like all their social programs to be paid for, housing for the poor, homeless, fucking, they even were giving out, Citgo was giving out and still gives out every year, heating oil subsidies for poor U.S. citizens, and started after Katrina, when we were having a hard time refining oil and things of this nature. Citgo came to and said, we'll help you out. But, this is a problem of running your economy off of one thing is never a good idea. All right. And this is why you can't have it all based off of gold or oil or minerals or whatever the case might be, because that product is going to wax and wane in value. And as time goes on, like for instance, if everybody got off of, oil in general, started moving away from petroleum and moving towards other products, it would make for a massive problem for countries like this that rely on oil this heavily. And Iran and Saudi Arabia and, you know, Kuwait and all these places that are very oil rich, they're going to have a big problem on their hands, because the next big thing is going to be hemp and the decorticator, which is it will eliminate our need for plastics, you know what I mean, from petroleum. And it's going to do a lot of things, and it's going to help the United States become more agriculturally sound and bring jobs and industry back to the States, which is what needs to happen. You know what I mean? Like, fuck marijuana, like, fuck weed. Like, yo, potheads are dumb as fuck. Like, that's not the part of it that you need to be paying attention to. It's the hemp that'll save everything. You know what I mean? Like, legitimately. You know, there's like almost every product in the world can be made from it. It can be grown almost anywhere in the States. And it has more fiber in it than, like, I think it's like 10 times more use than wood has per acre. And it takes a quarter of the time to grow. So, you know, with that being said, these are all things that, you know what I mean, like, we need to have a conversation about. But we need to stop saying that the United States caused this, because they didn't. It wasn't Saudi Arabia that caused this. You know what I mean? That's not really the fucking deal. It was the fact that the whole world had to slow down economically. And the number one market in the world, which is the United States, our people are tapped out. And they were been tapped out for about 10 years. And it's been a declining market just in general. And people stop driving SUVs and things of this nature. And it's not so much that Saudi Arabia is producing too much oil. They're just pumping it out, you know what I mean, as best they can to maintain, you know what I mean, the level where it needs to be at. Like, they go up and down to try to put certain people out of business, like offshore businesses. And, you know what I mean, they tried to fuck over our fracking industry, because it had to stay above $45 a barrel in order for them to become, stay solvent, you know what I mean, to make it worthwhile. And the same as Venezuela. There's no difference, you know what I mean? But there's no way the world could sustain $140 a barrel oil prices. Like, you know, entire industries would shut down. It just is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, everybody else would starve. And because your average fucking calorie in your food, everything you eat travels 2,000 miles before it gets to you. So maybe we should have a conversation about things, you know what I mean, in a rational and nuanced manner, because I just read to you the sanctions, and none of these sanctions affected the Venezuelan government before 2015. Just being real with you. That's really what it is, you know what I mean? So let's have a real conversation and stop yelling retarded bullshit at one another. All right? Peace.